This tent pitching method is super fast, efficient, and will keep your tent in place and clean during setup, even in high winds. Your finished pitch will stay dry in heavy rains and hold up against strong winds. I developed this method that I'm about to show you through trial and error over hundreds of nights of camping with different tents in a wide variety of conditions all over the world. For a strong and dry tent setup, you need to start with the right equipment. Not all tents are created equal. Look for a tent with aluminum poles and a full rain fly. The rain fly is the cover for the tent that's waterproof and keeps the rain out. A full rain fly means that it covers the tent all the way to the ground. You'll also need the correct type of stakes for the ground you'll be camping on, and the right number for your tent. The tent I'm setting up is the REI Half Dome 2 Plus and needs a whopping total of 14 stakes. I'm using stakes specifically for sand, which I've linked to below. You need guy lines to hold your tent against strong winds and keep the rain fly taut. If your tent didn't come with them, you should go buy some thin reflective cord to make them. Finally, if you're camping anywhere but the beach, I strongly suggest using a footprint with your tent. Now that you have the right equipment assembled, it's time to do another thing to set yourself up for success before you ever leave home. Your tent probably came from the store, folded up nice and pretty, and rolled with the poles in the very center of that spiral. What I want you to do is take everything out of the bag and repack it like this. You're going to repack your tent in the order in which you're going to need everything. So the things you need first go on the top, and the things you need last go on the bottom. So we're gonna put your poles in first. You're gonna put them to the side of the bag. Then you're gonna stuff your rain fly in, then stuff your tent in, then your footprint if you're gonna use one, and then on top of that, your stakes. So the reason that we're stuffing everything instead of folding and rolling it is for two reasons. The first one is that folding it creates creases in the fabric, and over time it can mess up the waterproofing if you do it the same way each time. Another reason is that when we're actually on the beach, laying the tent down and laying the rain fly down on the sand when the tent and the rain fly are damp means that you're gonna get a tent and a rain fly that are completely caked in sand. Now that I'm on the beach, I'm gonna figure out which direction the wind is coming from. I'm gonna pull the tent out of the bag, hold it up in the air so it doesn't get sandy, orient it so that the narrow side is towards the wind, and then I'm gonna stake down the two corners that are on the side towards the wind. That's the windward side. You'll hear me use that word again. The wind will hold it down onto the ground so it doesn't flop around and get sandy, which gives me a chance to go stake down the leeward side, or the side away from the wind. My pro tip is to put your tent stakes in your pocket. That way they're really accessible as you're setting your tent up. I had on bikini bottoms when I filmed this video, so my tent setup is a little slower than normal. Once we've got our tent staked down nice and tight, it's time to grab our tent poles. The number one thing I want you to avoid is getting sand on your tent poles. So don't drop them in the sand when they're folded up, and try not to let them fall over into the sand when they're extended and connected to the tent. I'm setting up the REI Half Dome 2 Plus from 2019, and all the poles are actually all connected to each other. I found that there's a specific way I have to set this tent up. So I actually extend the poles and connect them on the narrow sides first, and then I go to the other end of the tent and connect that narrow side to the corners, and then I connect the tent itself to the poles. Your tent may be different. You may have sleeves instead of hooks for your poles. You may have 2 or 3 or 4 separate poles. The key is to practice at home and get your technique down before you head to the beach. You'll notice that I'm really careful here, and I've let all my poles sit on my tent out of the sand. And as I extend each one, I'm really careful to watch the others and make sure they don't shift or move into the sand. When I set up that second to last pole, I'm holding the last pole so that it can't flop around and get sandy before I'm ready to connect it. Now that I've got my poles set up, I can go ahead and connect my tent to my poles because my tent connects with hooks. You'll notice that the wind has shifted pretty dramatically over the course of filming, and now instead of the wind hitting my tent at the narrow side, it's hitting my tent at the wide side. And the reason we want the wind to be at the narrow side of our tent is just because that makes our tent more streamlined and more resilient against really strong winds. If I were this early in setup, I might consider shifting my tent, but I wanted to go ahead and finish filming, so I didn't move it. Now it's time to add the rain fly. I'm going to walk around to the windward side of my tent and I'm going to pull my rain fly out. In this specific video, I chuck my rain fly over my shoulder, which I do pretty frequently, and then I'm going to flop it onto my tent. Using my tent and flopping it onto my tent keeps it up out of the sand and allows me to figure out which corner is which and where the doors are without getting it sandy. Then I'm going to connect my rain fly to my tent on the windward side first, meaning I'm going to clip it to the corner that's most into the wind, and I'm going to connect the side that's into the wind. Then I'm going to walk around my tent and connect the two corners that are out of the wind on the leeward side. Then I'll grab a couple of tent stakes and stake down the doors of my rain fly. My boyfriend and cameraman accidentally kicked one of the tent stakes and pulled it out. So you'll see me fix this in just a second before I stake down the doors. Once I have my doors staked down, I'm going to walk around my tent and adjust how tight the straps are that connect the rain fly to the corners of my tent to make sure that everything is relatively tight and smooth. Making sure your rain fly is as tight as possible and free of wrinkles and sagging just makes it more waterproof. It makes it easier for your rain fly to shed water, and any little puddles of water are more likely to leak through the waterproof material that your rain fly is made of. After I've staked down the doors, it's time to stake out the sides of the rain fly. So I want to make sure that not any one part of my rain fly is in physical contact with my tent, because that will cause a leak. It also helps with ventilation if you're in a hot area. So on the narrow side of my tent, there's actually a loop and a piece of cord that is designed to guy out the rain fly itself to keep it from touching the tent. Now it's time to guy out our tent. My tent was brand new, so the guy lines weren't already attached. I'm going to tie them onto the loop of my rain fly using a bowline knot. So the loop for the guy line is on the outside of the rain fly, and on the underneath side, you'll see a piece of Velcro. That piece of Velcro wraps around your tent pole so that when you stake out that guy line, the line itself actually holds up the tent pole. This adds rigidity and strength to your tent in addition to help keeping your rain fly tight. This is really great if you're in high wind areas like the beach. I did have a little bit of trouble with these sand stakes staying in place. They're only 9-inch sand stakes, and I typically use 12 or 13-inch sand stakes, which I've linked to below. Here's another view of me connecting my guy line to the loop of the rain fly using a bowline. Once you've attached your guy lines, you can just leave them on your tent from now on. But my tent was brand new, and most tents don't come with them already attached. Sometimes to get sand stakes to really hold, you'll have to dig down a little bit to where the sand is a bit firmer and push the sand stake into deeper, firmer sand. Once I've staked down all of my guy lines and I've adjusted all the straps on my rain fly to make sure that there isn't any sagging and there aren't too many wrinkles, my tent is ready for me to sleep in it.
Yeah, cool. Done. Badass. All right, smile.